Okay, Algebra 1, Second 9, Objective 15, factoring trinomials with a equals 1. Our description is we're going to use a diamond, or what I call the diamond. We're going to set it up where on the top number will be a times c, the bottom number will be b. Then we're going to write our answer in factored form. Now, what we are actually doing with this problem, if you remember the first 9 weeks, we went from something like x plus 3 times x plus 4. We did the box or the Punnett square and got x squared plus 7x plus 12. That's called multiplying binomials. Now we're going from the trinomial in this case, because it has 3 terms, and trying to factor it, which is setting it up as the multiplication of 2 binomials. Now, in order to understand where we get the a, b, and c, we have to understand the general form of a quadratic, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. So a is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is the constant or the number without a variable. Now, all these that we're dealing with in this lesson have an a of 1, which means they're all going to just be x squared. They're not going to be like 2x squared, 3x squared. They're all going to be x squared. So if I look here at my first one, factor x squared plus 14x plus 45. So again, the first thing I want to do is set up my diamond problem. So again, in order to do that, we have a times c on top. Again, a is the number in front of x squared, which in this case is an imaginary 1. C is the number without a variable. So if I multiply 1 times 45, I get 45 on top. B is the number in front of x, so that's 14. Now, in order to do the diamond, what we are trying to find, we're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply to get the top, and those same 2 numbers have to add to get the bottom. Now you may say, well, how do we even think about doing that? Well, if you know your multiplication and knows what goes into different numbers, if I think about what goes into 45, well, I know 1 times 45, 5 times 9, that's about it. Next, let's think about the signs. If I know I'm multiplying to get the top and I got a positive, I'm adding to get the bottom and I got a positive, so that means my 2 numbers would have to be positive. So we have to look at the pairs that we made and say, okay, well, which one multiplies to get 45 and adds to get 14, and that would be the 5 and the 9. So the 5 and the 9 are our 2 side numbers. So our factored answer, again, since this is just x squared, we have x and x. Since this is a positive 5, put plus 5. Since that's a positive 9, put plus 9. If we look at example 2, and basically I'm giving you a problem of each type of factors you could come up with. X squared minus 3x minus 18. So again, a times c on top. So a is 1, c is negative 18. So I get negative 18 on top. B on the bottom, since it's minus 3, b would be negative 3. So if you need to, let's think about the factors. So we got 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. Now about the signs. If I know I'm multiplying to get a negative number, then I know I have a positive times a negative. That's the only way you can multiply 2 numbers to get a negative. So next, if I think about if I'm adding 2 numbers and I want the sum to be a negative, then the bigger number has to be negative. So again, just by looking at this diamond problem, I already know I have a positive and a negative, and the bigger number has to be negative because I'm adding to get a negative number. So if I go over here and I know my bigger numbers has to be negative, Then I can look for the pair that multiplies to get negative 18 and adds to get negative 3, which is 3 and negative 6. So then I can write my factored answer. So it'd be x plus 3, because that's a positive, and x minus 6, because the 6 was a negative. Okay, if I look at number 3, x squared plus 5x minus 14. So again, set up our diamond because we're factoring. A again is 1. C is negative 14. So 1 times negative 14 is negative 14. B is your number in front of x, so B is 5. So we want to write down the factors of 14, which are 1 and 14 and 2 and 7. Now again, I'm multiplying to get a negative. So if I'm multiplying to get a negative again, that tells me I have a positive and a negative. But since I'm adding to get a positive number, that tells me my bigger number has to be positive. So again, I know I have a positive and a negative, and I know my bigger number has to be positive. So if I make the smaller numbers negative here, then I have to figure out which one adds to get 5, which is negative 2 and 7. So my factored answer would be x minus 2, x plus 7. Example 4, x squared minus 11x plus 30. Again, a is still 1, b, and then c. So a times c on top. 1 times 30 is 30. b is negative 11. So my factors of 30 are 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6. Now, since I've got a positive on top and a negative on the bottom, the only way I can get a positive is either these are both positive or they're both negative. Since I have a negative on the bottom, these both need to be negative because a negative plus a negative is a negative, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So I know both sets would need to be negative. So then I have to figure out which one adds to get negative 11, which is negative 5 and negative 6. So I'd have x minus 5, x minus 6. Okay, example 5, factor x squared minus 36. This one's a little tricky. A again is still the number in front of x squared. C is still the number without a variable. So in this case, I'd still have a times c on top, so 1 times negative 36 is negative 36. But there is no middle term in front of the x. So if there is no middle number in front of the x, then b in this case would be 0. So if I think about the factors of 36, I got 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, and 6 and 6. So if I'm multiplying to get a negative number, I know it has to be a positive and a negative. But if I'm adding to get 0, then that should tell you, okay, the numbers have to be the same, just opposite signs. So the only set here where the numbers are the same, I can make it opposite signs in this case. So negative 6 and 6, negative 6 times 6 is negative 36, negative 6 plus 6 is 0. So I have x minus 6, x plus 6.